We'd like to welcome an outstanding immigration attorney and public defender from Tucson, Margo Cowan. She's one of the founders of Keep Tucson Together, and she's going to be telling us today about the Pima County Justice for All program. So Margo, tell us everything you know about it. Thank you.
Okay, Paul. Well, thank you very much. And let me say thank you for inviting me. It's a great honor to spend some time with you this afternoon. What I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about the initiative, and then I'd like to throw it open for questions. And I'm pleased to answer any questions or respond to any doubts that anybody may have. The Justice for All initiative campaign is an effort to institutionalize the right to counsel for indigent Pima County residents who are put in deportation proceedings. Well, so what in the world does that mean? I serve as a Pima County public defender, and if someone is charged with a crime and they're facing even 1 day in jail, 1 day of deprivation of liberty, and they're poor and can't afford to hire a lawyer, so a lawyer will be appointed for them. A lawyer at public expense will be appointed for them. Now, that's not true in the immigration court context. That's because immigration removal proceedings in the immigration court are what's known as administrative proceedings. And it's kind of hard to believe that a proceeding that could tear a family apart forever is simply an administrative matter, but it is. And as an administrative matter, there's no provision made for people who are poor and are put in deportation proceedings to be represented by counsel. So, just for example, in fiscal year 2019 here in Pima County, about 24,000 families were put in removal proceedings. 18,000 of those families went alone. They stood alone in front of an immigration judge, who obviously is a lawyer, and were prosecuted by a government lawyer in their removal proceeding. Not surprisingly, 90-some percent, 95, 96% of those families were ordered removed. Our clinic that Paul mentioned, Keep Tucson Together, is a clinic that I organized, 10 or 12 years ago, and with the idea of representing families in immigration proceedings, finding other colleagues of mine who would represent these families at no charge, organizing folks like you to help prepare applications so that people who couldn't afford it didn't have to borrow money to pay someone to prepare their applications to stay in the United States. At the moment, the Keep Tucson Together clinic represents in excess of 800 Pima County families. These are people who have nowhere to turn. And the clinic has many lawyers, probably 20, 25 volunteer lawyers, and well over 100 volunteers that help people prepare their cases in immigration court. This is a great effort. I'm very proud of everybody who contributes time to Keep Tucson Together, but this needs to be institutionalized. It can't depend on the goodwill of neighbors here in Pima County. And we certainly, our clinic certainly could never represent 18,000 people. And I'm sure that I don't have the figure for fiscal year 2020, but I'm sure that it was greater than the 24,000 figure. And I'm sure that there were more than 18,000 families that stood alone. So I started a couple of years ago to try and get the Pima County Board of Supervisors to create the Office of Immigration Defense to represent Pima County folks who are put in deportation proceedings and who are poor. And the effort was really led by the late chairman, Richard Elias,
Mm.
And he and Sharon Bronson supported establishing the office through board action, but we couldn't get one more vote. And we tried for a year and a half or so, and just finally decided that really the way to go was not through the board and have it established by board action, because going that way, it could also be defunded if a different board came in a few years down the road. And so we look for a way to make this permanent, to institutionalize the right to counsel. And really the only way to do that is to do it through voter initiative um, lawmaking, which is the initiative. And so that was the birth of the Justice for All initiative. And it was the late Chairman Elias who kicked off this campaign just about a year ago. Um, and and we began to collect signatures. And as you can imagine, um, within weeks, the pandemic hit, and we had to shut down our efforts. We gave some thought to whether or not we wanted to um, go forward and see if we could do it for the November 2022 election cycle. And and as more and more people came to the Keep Tucson Together clinic with terrible stories of hardship and requiring legal representation, it became clear that we had to do this, and it's an imperative. We have to do it. So we are about to kick off our campaign again, and our goal is to collect. I think we need, if I'm not mistaken, 58,000 signatures, um, and we need to file them by July 2nd of 2022. But I'm aiming for 90,000 because I want to make sure that we get on the ballot. And I also feel like while you collect signatures, you organize and you educate and you ask questions. And so I want to do the groundwork that will make our efforts successful at the ballot box. I think it's really, really important. As a public defender, I understand and I appreciate the right to counsel for someone who's poor and is facing even one day in jail. But as an immigration defense attorney, and I've practiced for a long, long time, it's hard to imagine the sanction of tearing a family apart, ripping a family apart forever, in an environment where people have no idea how to defend themselves, and then not have availability of court-appointed attorneys to represent them in this process. A lot of people say to us as we're collecting signatures, well, gosh, I thought they had a right to counsel. I thought they had an attorney. And the fact of the matter is they don't. I want to share something. About a year ago, we used to run the Keep Tucson Together clinic at Pueblo High School every Thursday night, and at Southside Presbyterian Church, the birthplace of the sanctuary movement, every other Saturday afternoon. And at Pueblo, we would regularly have hundreds of people show up to talk to lawyers and lay volunteers about their case and answer their questions, and really sort of address their fears and take that kind of fear of losing family members and confront it straight on with accurate information about what their rights are. Really give people hope. And when the school closed down, I think in March or early April, the clinic no longer could meet there. And we also stopped meeting at the church because it just wasn't safe. And so we have a small community office in the barrio next to the community center where we receive people. So we've continued to represent people in immigration court during the last year. And during that period, it became just more and more evident, more and more poignant, the stories of the families that we were representing. A couple of scholars from the University of Arizona did a survey about a year ago, I think in the fall, of a couple of hundred of our clients. And it was interesting. The vast majority of our clients come from mixed families. And so what's that mean? Well, it means that someone in their family doesn't have documents, but the spouse may be a lawful permanent resident or maybe a US citizen. There may be several children. Some are United States citizens, some are DACA beneficiaries, but the vast majority of our clients are what we call blended families. And so when I use the term of tearing families apart, we're tearing families apart that where there are US citizen and lawful permanent resident members, and perhaps one person in the family is being expelled. And as you might imagine, that creates great pain and suffering. And it's not just emotional pain and suffering, it's economic. People are displaced. A lot of people have purchased a home and have been, making payments over the years, lose their home. We found that on average, the median length of residency in Pima County for these families who came to the clinic because one of their family members was in removal, was 16 and a half years. So these are families on average who had lived in Pima County for 16 and a half years. The other thing that we found is the vast majority of folks paid taxes, both state and federal taxes. So people ask me, well, how can people who don't have documents pay taxes? Well, there's a couple of ways. After the amnesty of 1986, some of you may remember the debate that led up to the passage of the amnesty bill. The question was, the great debate before it was passed was, shall we penalize employers for hiring people without documents, or shall we hire workers for working without documents? And at the end of the day, Congress decided to penalize employers who hired people without documents. And a couple of things happened. Obviously, there are very few prosecutions of employers who hire folks without documents. But the other thing that happened is immediately after the passage of that legislation, Congress created something called an individual taxpayer identification number. And they amended the Internal Revenue Code to do this. And what that is, it's a number for people who don't have documents that you apply to IRS and you establish an account and you're given a number that permits you to pay taxes and permits the employer to deduct taxes and pay taxes as they're required based on number of employees and that kind of thing. So Congress and Amnesty decided to penalize employers, but then they immediately fixed it by passing the individual taxpayer identification number. And so the vast number of people that we see in the clinic have paid taxes for years. So they've lived here for many years in Pima County. They're working in Pima County. Their families are blended. And yet in periods, for example, the last administration, people without papers are demonized and family members are put in removal and they stand before a judge all by themselves and they have no idea how to defend themselves and they're ordered deported for life. And that's sort of the essence of why we came together to say we don't think the people of Pima County want that to happen to their employees, the people that live next door, the people that their kids play with, that go to school with them, go to school with their kids, that are in their churches. And that's the essence of the initiative. Sometimes people say to me, well, how is this going to be paid for? And it can be paid for several ways, and certainly we can scan you a copy, whomever is interested, a copy of the language of the initiative. But in the language of the initiative, um, I wrote that money can be drawn from the general fund to fund this office, because the general fund is based on taxes. And as this study, the U of A Scholars study noted, is the vast majority of these people pay taxes. They pay taxes and they get no benefit. So this is also a source from the county's general fund. It can also, I believe, be structured like a public defender's office. And the public defender is appointed in a particular case. And then the superior court asks the individual to fill out a form based on what their income is and what their assets are. And a sliding scale is applied. And some people pay nothing. Other people pay $400, $500, $1,000 for the representation, which obviously is a good deal compared to what it would require, how much money it would be required to retain private counsel. But it is another source of income. And also, I think that there's significant sources of grant money available that the county can apply for. And the county often applies for grants to subsidize other county projects. When we were considering trying to have the Board of Supervisors create this office, I raised about $500,000 from various grant sources, and we didn't have a third vote to create the office and receive the funds. Now, I'm not suggesting that $500,000 would pay for the office. Might pay most of it, might pay only a small fraction of it. But the point is, I think that there's money available from the private sector and from the philanthropy sector that could also match whatever is raised through fees assessed to clients and funds that are applied from the general fund. So there are many sources in terms of how this might be funded. The other thing that I wanted to share with you is who are some of the people that have endorsed this the initiative so far. I'm going to run through a long list of elected officials, but I think probably we could all agree that Linda is the most prominent. Congress members Kirkpatrick and Grijalva have endorsed. Former Congressman Ron Barber has endorsed. Of course, late chairman of the late chairman of the Pima County Board of Supervisors, Richard Elias, was really a champion of the initiative. Mayor Regina Romero, council members Lane Santa Cruz, Richard Fimbres, Paul Cunningham, Paul Durham, Pima County Board of Supervisors and TUSD school member Adelita Grijalva, and several other school board members around the county, Eva Dung, the Pima Area Labor Federation, the Democratic Party of Pima County, and several of the legislative district clubs have also endorsed. So here we are, and we're still in the pandemic, but we've figured out some ways to collect signatures because we can't wait. This just can't wait. We can't keep saying every election cycle, oh well, our little clinic, Keep Tucson Together, will do 700 or 800 cases, and the other 18 or 19,000 families that go it alone, oh well, we can't do anything about that. We're going to do something about this. We have to do something about it, and we have to do it now. We've tried to organize our work on a precinct basis. We purchased the van list, and we have all the materials that people need to do work a precinct, traditionally work a precinct. We have literature, we have t-shirts, we have masks, we have, tote bags, we have signs, and we've tried to find folks that would say, look, I'll take on 10 precincts and I'll find 10 people, maybe one in each precinct that lives there, that knows their neighbors, that'll take responsibility for collecting signatures in that precinct. And I'll take my precinct, but I'll also oversee those 10. And our method is to do a literature drop, um, non-contact, and say, for example, maybe take 2 or 3 streets in a precinct, divide it up in some way, and say on Saturday in front of my house at 730 South Osborne, there'll be a table, um, clean pens in a bag, in a little baggie that you take the baggie, take the pen home with you. Just come and sign the petition. And please take a yard sign, Justice for All, Justicia para Todos, and put it in your yard or in front of your business, so people begin to ask you, what's this all about? We have literature. We need support. We need support if people are in groups. You invite us to your group. Please endorse us. We need to get as many petitions out to as many people as we can. There's 15 signatures on a page, and we need contributions. We probably raised, I'm going to guess, around 70,000 from September of 2019 until we shut down, and we were able to produce a lot of materials and a lot of yard signs and a lot of petitions, and did a lot of mailings and that kind of stuff. But we have to start all that over again, as you might imagine. So just about any of the traditional ways that one does organizing, political organizing, issue organizing, that's what we're trying to do, and we are absolutely committed to getting these signatures by July 2nd, and to getting this Justice for All on the ballot. You know, I believe strongly that when people understand what Justice for All is, everybody knows somebody. Everybody knows somebody who's out of status, or everybody's heard a story about somebody who's out of status. So I think here in Pima County, this is an initiative that will pass, and I think it'll pass with a strong margin. I think our only challenge is getting it on the ballot. So that's an overview, and I would be more than pleased to answer any questions that anyone has, and I would love to hear some comments.
I have a question maybe to start with. Can you hear me okay, Margo?
I can.
Okay. With the things that Laura Conover's doing in the Pima County Attorney's Office, will that have any effect on you on the things you're trying to do over at your office, at the Public Defenders?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you for asking it. I supervise a unit that we call Crimigration. And what that means is I supervise 12 lawyers, and we represent all of the non-citizens who reside in Pima County and are charged with crimes, with felonies. And, you know, there's some crimes that if you plead guilty to something and you take a plea or something like that, it means you can't stay in the United States. And there are usually alternatives. And so Laura and I have been discussing a policy for her office that I wrote, a proposed policy that basically I titled it, "No one should be punished twice for the same offense." And so, you know, we don't say that someone who's out of status should not be held accountable for their conduct. But we do say that someone who's out of status and commits an offense should be able to be held responsible for that offense, but it should not have a secondary consequence of making them removable from the United States. And we're in discussions as a public defender, in discussions with her office as the prosecutor, But, there's no commitments but been made yet. We're still in dialogue. But I will say that she's very interested in serving everyone in Pima County equally and not unnecessarily disabling people without status solely because of an offense that may have been committed.
Yes. Margo, two questions. I know that my wife and I signed the petition, I think, last fall. I wonder if those signatures will still be valid going forward to 2022. And my second question is, I would like to hear you articulate what are the viable defenses to removal?
Okay, that's a good question. I wish I could tell you that those signatures survive because we collected thousands of them, but they don't. We had to start all over again.
Okay.
Here are the defenses to removal. One of them, probably the most, I think the one that we implement the most, is something called cancellation of removal. And that requires that you have an immediate relative who is either a lawful permanent resident or a spouse or a parent. If it's a parent, you have to be under the age of 21. Well, in some cases, that's not true. Let's say a parent. And the basis of that relief is that your removal from the United States would create a great hardship on your immediate relative. And you also have to have lived in the United States for 10 years, immediately preceding the time that you're put in removal proceedings. And so that's probably the one that we raise most often. And, one thing I must say is that immigration policy is wholly controlled by the political moment. And by that I mean, during the Obama years, hardship was defined by the immediate relative describing, what would happen to their family. They would stay, they would lose a spouse's income, they couldn't support the family, an elderly parent would be deported to where nobody could take care of them, something like that. During the prior administration, immigration judges, and this is because immigration court judges are not very independent. They are controlled by the political moment and instructed sort of about the paradigm in which they are to consider the testimony. And so during this past administration, there was hardly a hardship, no matter how egregious it was, that rose to the level to support a cancellation of removal. Even just in these last couple of weeks in the current administration, we've seen a change in that outcome of those cases in immigration court, a much more benevolent application of the law. There's a category which is known as adjustment of status. And adjustment of status is when there's a relative that could petition for you. There's a way for immediate relatives to petition for their relative to become a lawful permanent resident. The only category that's not based on a numerical allocation of available visas is a spouse of a U.S. citizen. And so if you're the spouse of a U.S. citizen and you're put in removal and you came across the border with a visitor's visa, for example, you can apply before a judge to adjust your status from no status to a status of lawful permanent resident. Other categories, for example, a spouse of a lawful permanent resident, are backlogged, or the brother and sister of a U.S. citizen, or a parent of a U.S. citizen. Those are backlogged 15, 20 years. So you can't ask for relief from deportation for those categories because the court is not going to agree to let you stay in the United States until they become current. So adjustment works for spouses of U.S. citizens. It really doesn't work for any of the other categories. And those quotas haven't been increased. I think the last time they were increased, I want to say it was 1972. And so they're archaic. They don't at all respond to the current presentation. And then, of course, there's asylum applications. And just it's the same paradigm in terms of the decision being rendered in the political moment. And let me give you I don't want to use up too much of our time here, but let me give you a very brief example. I had a woman under the last administration whose husband was, their family owned a bakery and a tortilla factory out of their house. They lived in Magdalena. So they were small business people and they did very well. He had a tourist visa, so did she, so did their kids. He would come up and buy his supplies in Nogales, Arizona, and take them back and use them in his business. And the local cartel put a lot of pressure on him to carry drugs through the port. He resisted, and finally they said, well, you know, one of your family members is going to have to pay since you don't cooperate with us. And I don't know how much folks know about the way that cartels work in Mexico, but that's what happens. And family members are taken, are sexually abused, are tortured, killed, just disappeared until the person cooperates. Well, this fellow just gave in and he cooperated, but that's in the context of he knows that that's what could happen to his family if he doesn't cooperate. So he cooperated. Obviously, he was caught at the port. I don't remember what he had. He had like 2 pounds of some contraband. He was federally prosecuted. He served 3 years in prison. And so the cartel went back to his wife there in Magdalena and said, okay, we're going to store our contraband and our guns in your bakery, in your tortilla factory. And she said, no, you're not. You know, you can't do that. You've already ruined our family. Look what happened to my husband. And they came anyway, and they put their merchandise in her business. She reported that to the chief of police in Magdalena, who raped her. And she immediately went and got her 2 boys and came to the port, left the house, left the contraband, left the bakery, left the tortilla factory, left everything, presented herself at the border, and came and asked for asylum. I represented her at under the previous administration, and of course, telling her story was reliving the rape, and it was terrible, terribly traumatic for her. And she sought asylum for herself and for her boys. And the judge denied it, and he was very cruel in his denial and used harsh language about, I'm sure you could have done something. I'm sure you could have gotten someone to help you. I'm sure you could have gone and reported this rape somewhere else, and that kind of thing. And she was, as you might imagine, just devastated. And I said, hey, come on, let's appeal. Let's appeal. This is something that we can do something about. She disappeared. She just evaporated. I never saw her again. And so I share that story because if I were to try that case today, well, a couple of things. If someone was to present themselves at the border today with that kind of story, they would be interviewed by an asylum officer. They would not be arrested. And likely they would be granted asylum in an administrative session, not in immigration court, just by an asylum officer. But I have no doubt whatsoever in immigration court today that grant would be made, and she would be an asylee, and her boys would be asylees, and they'd be protected. So, just in these few days of this administration, we've seen a black and white change in terms of the way that cases are adjudicated in immigration court. But in my mind, that doesn't minimize the need for attorneys to give voice to the relief that people have from removal. They're the same judges, but they are, they receive instructions from the Attorney General about what the policies are of the administration. And so when I say they're wholly controlled by the political moment, that's what I mean.
Okay. Pam Duchesne has a question.
Oh, okay. Hi, Margo.
Hi.
First of all, it's really nice to hear some good news like that, how quickly things seem to be changing. My question is that when this initiative is passed in November 2022, correct me if I'm wrong, it'll become law in, I suppose, January 2023? Is that correct?
I think that's right.
Okay. And if that is so, did you entertain the thought of maybe going through the county supervisors in addition to that and trying to put the program in and then institutionalize it?
I went back and forth in my mind about that. But I think it's just best to institutionalize it. I believe that there will be some kind of immigration reform, probably, I'm guessing before the August recess. That's my guess. I think kind of the priority, obviously, is to get the COVID bill passed and I think the next one that the administration is going to focus on will be the, I don't know what to call it. It's the infrastructure bill, the highways and the dams and all that. And I think that will be the second priority because so many people have lost their jobs during the pandemic, and that that would help solve a couple of problems at the same time. But then I think the next big one that the administration will introduce will be the immigration reform bill, and I think that probably would be introduced, I'm guessing, May or beginning of June. They've already released sort of talking points and bullets about what's included, and it's very good and it's very broad. And I'm hoping that would pass before the August recess. And then really what we would be about would be assisting people filling out applications for the equivalent, the current equivalent of amnesty. I want to share one thing that was interesting, this sort of an event that occurred to me, is I was part of a movement that fought very hard for the amnesty of 1986. And, we fought for years and years, and then it happened. And then the next day, more undocumented people came. And I don't know why I didn't anticipate that happening, but it was sort of like, one day you go, all right. And then all of a sudden there's a person there that says, well, I fled from El Salvador because of X, Y, and Z. And so I think that the timing will be good, because I believe that the vast majority of folks who are out of status will be able to regularize their status. And so institutionalizing the right to counsel, I don't think will start off on such a huge, macro level. Obviously, it will grow again, but because I think the three categories of people that at least President Biden has indicated preliminarily that will be put in removal will be people who have been convicted of what's called an aggravated felony, which is a serious felony, people that pose a security risk, and people that pose a border security risk. And so I think that it will sort of be a reset in terms of the people who are actually in removal, which is not a bad time to start a defense project so that it can kind of grow with the clients.
Margo, I'm curious to hear you explain how it is that a person typically ends up in a removal situation. A guy is married to a U.S. citizen. He's lived here for 10 or 12 years. How does he end up in the removal process?
That's a great question. And under the prior Pima County Sheriff's Administration, stopping people that appeared to be of Mexican descent was a priority of the sheriffs. And so there would be a traffic stop, what we call a pretext stop. It would be you stopped at the stop sign, but not all the way. You rolled a little bit into the intersection, or you have a tail light out, or there's a rosary hanging from your rearview mirror, or your car is old and it's riding kind of low, so we think maybe you have some contraband in your trunk, all sorts of pretext stops. And the sheriff wouldn't say, you went through a yellow light, he'd say, let me see your identification. People that didn't have identification, obviously, the Border Patrol would be called immediately. No traffic tickets issued. People were just taken into Border Patrol custody. That was the major source of urban detentions in Pima County under the prior sheriff's administration. Tucson police had a very strict, bright line policy against those kind of profile stops. As a matter of fact, let's say there was an infraction that they stopped, the person doesn't have a license. If you're driving without a license, they can't let you go. They can't give you a ticket and let you go. Usually they would impound this for U.S. citizens, this for anybody. Usually your car would be impounded and you'd be given a ticket. What Tucson police officers did is they would have them call a family member to come to the site and get the car and give them a ticket. And so those policies are very protective. And it was a bright line that TPD doesn't care about status, TPD cares about public safety. And that was the bottom line. That's not the case with the sheriff. Now, the sheriff's policies are being rolled back, but I'm sure all of you can imagine once you sort of empower law enforcement to do things a certain way, it is hard to come in and say, we're not going to have those kind of suspect stops. And you're not going to call the Border Patrol. If somebody has a ticket, you give them a ticket, you give them a chance to call somebody. So those policies are changing at the sheriff's department, but they are far from being set aside. and a policy like TPD being implemented. And, we see this also with police, like in Sahuarita, in Marana, in other smaller communities. A real mixed bag about stops.
Margo, could you tell me just this, maybe it's an impossible question to answer, but how do you see DACA improving now that we have a different administration?
Dick Durbin introduced a bill for DACA, and I haven't read the bill, but there is a lot of discussion about making a direct path. And I don't know whether or not this is just popular language or actual precise language. But there's a lot of discussion about, quote unquote, making a pathway for DACA beneficiaries for US citizenship. And in immigration history, that's happened a few times. That, for example, undocumented people that served in combat have been made US citizens directly without being lawful permanent residents in the middle. So I haven't read Durbin's bill, but there is a lot of discussion about not just granting lawful permanent residence, but making them US citizens.
Okay. Well, does anyone else have a question? If you do, raise your hand or send a chat. Margo, I'll ask you this question. I think it comes from watching another video that you did before. How much is money a factor in locking people up in private prisons?
It's such a disgraceful situation. The General Accounting Office and the contracting folks for the United States negotiated contracts with private prisons that require 100% occupancy. And so what that means is they get paid for beds whether they're full or not. And of course, there's an incentive then to keep them full. And I must share with everyone that we've been very aggressive in terms of advocating for people's release from the detention facilities in Arizona. There are two in Eloy. One is called Eloy, the other is called La Palma, and there's one in Florence. And all three of those detention facilities have very, very high rates of COVID infection. And the conditions are just this horrific that people are kept in, particularly when they're ill, and lack of medical care and that kind of thing. So we've been very successful. We've probably since beginning of March of last year, we've been able to either get out on bond or get paroled out 134 people out of custody. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it is in the millions.
It's a lot.
And you know what, I want to mention that President Biden has said that he wants to terminate contracts with private prisons, but he has he's said that only in the criminal context. And so I'm hopeful when the broad immigration relief bill finally is introduced, that it includes in the context of that legislation the same proposition, because those places are just horrific.
Sounds like it. So does anyone else have a question? This is your chance. And Margo, in the meantime, we want to be sure we have your contact information, I think. Your email, your phone, anything else that we need. I have another question here from Barb. It says, what can we do to help relieve the issues present? I guess signing the petition, and what else would you need?
Well, you can sign the petition. You can take a couple of them and see if you can figure out, ask other people that you know to see if they could get 15 signatures. That would be a great help. anything in terms of fundraising would be great. Even small contributions, everything helps the campaign. Put up yard signs if you're able to do that. Let other people know, ask other people that you know if they put up a sign, we'll be glad to deliver them to you. Anything that you can think of that, and I'm always pleased to, speak to gatherings. It doesn't have to be a bunch of people. If you want to get 2 or 3, your family together, your neighbors, people from the church, and we'll put together a little discussion, for half an hour or so. Anything that we can do to explain what the Justice for All initiative is and to get folks on board to help us.
Okay.
If I may, is it something that lay people can do to assist in terms of, paperwork, filling out forms, or is it something that only people with legal training would be able to help?
Oh no, the vast majority of the work of our clinic is done by lay people. Yeah, if you would like to volunteer for the clinic, we do a training like once a month, I think, a Zoom. Let me give you our office number. It's 520, it's 623-4084. And you should talk to Phil. He's the law office manager. And his wife is a recent law school graduate, and she does an orientation, I think once a month. Our work is broken down into teams so that we have a bond and parole team. They prepare applications for bond hearings, requests to be paroled. We have a cancellation of removal team. That was the team that's the relief that I explained earlier. We have an asylum team. We have an adjustment team. Adjustment is family reunification, assisting. And all of these, some of them are filling out forms, which we, sort of, it's not exactly teach because you look at it and it's just common sense, but we don't just throw somebody out there and ask them to try and work with somebody to fill out a form. Family unification, we do DACA, we renew work permits, we have naturalization, we have a special program that's called derivative citizenship, and that means if your parent was a U.S. citizen and you were born outside the country, under certain circumstances, you can also be a U.S. citizen at birth, a derivative citizen. So we do the work that to research if you meet the qualifications and that kind of thing. So it's helping people collect documents, thinking of creatively what kind of documents, because every category sort of meets different documents. So thinking about people that tend to be poor and don't have a way to retain documents, largely are Spanish speakers and are not used to retaining documents. How you identify what documents people need and you acquire those, that kind of thing. So there's our motto at the Keep Tucson Together Clinic is there's a job for everybody. If you tell me you have 10 minutes, I have a job for you. If you tell me you want to learn how to do derivative citizenship, which is a little more complicated, we're glad to teach you.
So your number is 623-4084, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then we have your email addresses, you and Moira, and anyone else that you would like for us to have.
My email at the public defender is margo.cowan@pima.gov. And my desk is 724-9146.
724-9146. Well, we'll get that information out.
Okay.
Anybody that put information in the chat, especially for contact to get in touch with Justice for All or Margo, if you'll go over and hit participation, open up your partition bar, and down at the bottom, there's you can hit on file. That file will save all that information because once we shut down this Zoom program, it will no longer be online. But if you'll save it, it will save to your computer. So if you like that information and didn't have a chance to write as fast as Paul, you can save that for later. The other thing is, I was going to say a horror story that we came across, Margo, and you probably come across this too. My wife was working for the Tucson Catholic Church up in Tucson, and she was helping distribute clothes to the women and children, and they were telling horror stories about their paperwork, that they would have the wrong dates, the wrong name, or something like that. And so when they went to the judge would say, well, where were you? You should have been here 2 weeks ago. And so, of course, then they were denied process. So it's simple things like that. You're right. Common sense really helps out a lot.
All right. George, is there anything else that you want to talk about?
No, I was going to let everyone know, and especially Margo too. Thank you for this great presentation. Chris Nanos and Laura Conover will be our guest
that's March.
On March the 13th, the same day you're having your rally, and so we can ask some of these same questions. What are they doing jointly to help in the Justice for All program?
Good.
And
That's good. Yeah.
And we will post up all the information we can up in our newsletter and our website about your locations and time that you're collecting signatures, so people can come by and do so. And
thank you for doing that.
All right.
And we have a sign in our office, and as soon as we can get our office open up again, we will come and get some of those signs so people can come by our office and pick them up.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
Margo, a couple of things. Thank you so much. Thank you. Excellent information. Those are chats. Thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Important information. I hope we can get you some help. But Margo, fantastic job. And I'm sure that you are just full of more information. If we ask you any more questions, did a great job. It was a pleasure having you. Pleasure.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
All right.